At my daughter's wedding, her groom raised his glass, pointed at me, and mocked my meaningless life, causing the guests to laugh. My daughter shyly lowered her head, but then her father-in-law approached her, his eyes wide open, and asked for my autograph. He recognized who I really was. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Micah's voice cut through my living room like broken glass. Uncle Ted, we understand things aren't exactly flush for you financially, but this wedding means everything to Verna. I sat in my old leather armchair, checkbook already spread across my lap, pen trembling slightly between my fingers. 20 years of this chair, 20 years of comfortable conversations with my daughter. Now she stood by the window, her designer heels clicking against my worn hardwood floors as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. I want to help. My voice came out steadier than I felt. That's why you're here, right? Micah paced behind my coffee table, his expensive watch catching the afternoon light. Every few seconds, his eyes swept across my modest furniture, the faded couch Eleanor and I had bought secondhand, the scratched coffee table Verna had colored on as a child. His expression said everything. The venue alone is $35,000, he continued, checking that watch again, and Dad's already covering the catering, the band, the flowers. How much do you need? I interrupted, already knowing the answer would hurt. Verna finally turned from the window. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of my little girl in her face, the one who used to climb into this very chair with picture books. Then her features hardened again. 50,000 would be perfect, she said quietly. The number hit like a physical blow. I opened my checkbook, my aging hands suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. The balance stared back at me. 23,716, everything. My entire savings account, built penny by penny since Eleanor died. 20,000, I said, tearing out the check with careful precision. That's everything I have. Every penny of my savings. Silence stretched between us like a canyon. Micah stopped pacing, his mouth opening slightly. Then he laughed, not cruel, just genuinely surprised. Seriously? My father will spend more than that just on flowers. Heat crept up my neck. It's what I can do. Ted, Uncle Ted. Micah caught himself, his tone shifting to something that might have been pity. I appreciate the gesture, I really do. But we're talking about a real wedding here. Verna deserves better than this. His gesture encompassed my entire life. The family photos on the mantel, the stack of bills on my desk, the coffee growing cold on the side table. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd saved, dismissed with a wave of his hand. Dad! Verna's voice cracked like a whip, but she wasn't defending me. She was warning him to be more careful with his words. Look, Micah continued, his voice softer now, more dangerous. We both know you're living on Social Security and whatever tiny pension you get from your music days. This isn't about charity. This is about what Verna needs for her future. I held out the check anyway, my signature still wet at the bottom. $20,000. 4 months of my income. The money I'd been saving for emergencies, for repairs to this old house, for the medical bills that would inevitably come. Micah didn't take it. Keep it, he said gently. Maybe use it to fix that leak in your roof. The words hung in the air like smoke. I hadn't mentioned the leak to anyone. He'd noticed it himself, the small water stain on my ceiling, barely visible unless you knew where to look. He'd cataloged my failures, my inadequacies, in the 15 minutes he'd been here. Verna moved toward the door, her heels sharp against my floor. We should go. Verna. I stood up, the check still extended between us. Honey, please. She paused, her hand on the doorknob. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn around, might remember who I was, what we used to be to each other. We'll figure something else out, she said without turning. Don't worry about it. The front door opened, letting in the sound of traffic from the street. Micah followed her, pausing only to glance back at me with something that might have been sympathy. Thanks anyway, Uncle Ted. Then they were gone, leaving only the sound of car doors slamming and an engine starting. I remained standing in my empty living room, holding a check for $20,000 that nobody wanted. The silence pressed against my eardrums like water. I set the check down on the coffee table, watching it flutter slightly in the breeze from the air conditioning vent. $20,000 reduced to a worthless piece of paper by a few careless words. Outside, Micah's BMW disappeared around the corner, taking my daughter with it. I sank back into my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The house felt different now, smaller somehow, like the walls had moved inward during their visit. Every familiar object seemed to mock me. The family photos smiling from the mantel, the guitar case gathering dust in the corner, the stack of bills that never seemed to shrink. My phone buzzed against the side table. The sound cut through the quiet like a knife, making me jump. I fumbled for my reading glasses, squinting at the bright screen. A text from Verna. "Don't bother coming to our wedding. We don't need your charity." I read it twice, then a third time, the words refusing to change. My fingers moved across the screen, trying to call her back, but the phone went straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice, cheerful and professional, asked me to leave a message after the beep. I couldn't speak. The phone slipped from my hands, clattering onto the coffee table next to the check. My chest tightened, each breath becoming a conscious effort. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about losing the only family I had left. I picked up the phone again, started typing a response. "Verna, honey, I love you. Please don't." Deleted. I just wanted to help. "I'm sorry if... Deleted. Can we talk? Please?" Deleted. Nothing I wrote seemed right. Nothing captured the hollow ache spreading through my chest, the disbelief that my own daughter, my little girl, could cut me off so completely. The text felt like her words, but sharper somehow, crueler than she'd ever been, even during her worst teenage years. Micah's influence, maybe, or maybe this was who she'd become, and I'd been too blind to see it. The afternoon light shifted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, normal suburban sounds that felt impossibly far away. I sat there holding my phone, staring at that message, waiting for something to make sense again. But nothing did. The check lay forgotten on the table, my signature already starting to fade in the sunlight. All that money, all those months of careful saving, meaningless now. Not because it wasn't enough, but because they didn't want it at all. Because they didn't want me. The house creaked around me, settling into evening. I should get up, make dinner, do something productive with the rest of my Saturday. Instead, I sat frozen in my chair, holding a phone that felt heavier than stone, reading the same brutal message over and over until the words lost all meaning. "Don't bother coming to our wedding," my daughter's wedding, the day I'd been looking forward to for months, despite my reservations about Micah, the day I'd planned to walk her down the aisle, to give a speech about how proud Eleanor would have been, to dance with her the way we used to when she was small and stood on my feet. Gone. All of it gone in 15 words on a screen. I set the phone down and walked to the mantel, my legs unsteady beneath me. The family photos waited there like old friends, faces frozen in happier times. My fingers traced the edge of the largest frame. Verna at 3, Eleanor holding her on her lap. Me in the background with my old acoustic guitar. We looked so complete then. The memory hit without warning, teaching 5-year-old Verna to ride her bike in our old driveway. Eleanor cheering from the porch steps, her hands cupped around her mouth. "You've got it, baby girl! You've got it!" And Verna's triumphant laugh when she finally pedaled away on her own, wobbling but determined, her training wheels spinning uselessly in the air. I picked up another photo. Beach vacation, 1998. All 3 of us building an elaborate sandcastle, our hands caked with wet sand. Eleanor wore her favorite yellow sundress, the one that made her eyes look like honey. Verna, maybe 8 then, had sand in her hair, and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. The kitchen called to me, muscle memory guiding my feet. I filled the kettle with shaking hands, the simple task grounding me in the present. But even here, surrounded by everyday objects, the memories followed. Eleanor braiding Verna's hair for the first day of school, her fingers quick and sure. "Hold still, sweetheart. We want you to look perfect." And me at the stove, flipping pancakes into funny shapes, Mickey Mouse ears, lopsided hearts, anything to make our nervous 6-year-old smile. The kettle whistled. I poured hot water over a tea bag, watching the liquid darken, inhaling the familiar Earl Grey scent. Eleanor's favorite. She used to make a pot every evening, settling onto the couch between Verna and me for our family movie nights. Popcorn in a big wooden bowl, blankets tangled around our feet. all of us arguing over what to watch. She has your stubborn streak, Ted, Eleanor would whisper during Verna's teenage years, when our daughter would storm upstairs over some perceived injustice. But even then, even during the worst arguments, Verna would eventually creep back downstairs, curl up next to Eleanor on the couch, and let herself be forgiven. I returned to the mantel with my tea, studying each photograph like evidence of a crime. Here was proof that we'd been happy once. Here was Verna at 16, graduation cap askew, hugging both her parents with genuine affection. "I love you guys," she'd said that day. "I love you so much." When had that changed? When had I become someone whose love was charity, whose presence was unwelcome? After Eleanor died, probably. The funeral, the terrible months that followed, Verna pulling away from me like I was contaminated with grief. She'd been 25 then, old enough to handle loss, but maybe too young to forgive me for not being able to fill the hole her mother left behind. I wasn't enough. Without Eleanor as the center, as the glue holding us together, Verna and I had drifted apart like debris after a shipwreck. Different pieces of the same family, floating in different directions. I picked up the most recent photo, the three of us at Eleanor's last birthday, 2 months before the diagnosis. We'd gone to her favorite restaurant, shared a bottle of wine, laughed until our sides hurt. In the picture, Eleanor's head rests on my shoulder, while Verna leans across the table, reaching for her mother's hand. We looked invincible then. We looked like nothing could ever break us. The clock on the mantel chimed 5 o'clock. Had I really been standing here for over an hour? The tea had grown cold in my hands. The light outside had shifted toward evening, and I was still holding this photograph, still trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. 3 faces smiled back at me from the frame, a family complete, unaware of the pain waiting just around the corner. Eleanor's laugh seemed to echo from the glass, Verna's young voice calling "Daddy" from some distant summer afternoon. But the silence in the house was absolute now, broken only by the tick of the clock and the settling of old wood. The check still lay on the coffee table, forgotten. The phone stayed mercifully quiet, and I stood there among the ghosts of better days, holding proof of what we used to be, wondering if I'd ever see my daughter smile at me like that again. The happy family photo slipped from my fingers, replaced by another frame, this one from 2 years later. Eleanor looked so thin here, her cheekbones sharp beneath translucent skin, her smile brave but tired. The hospital bracelet around her wrist caught the light. I remembered the antiseptic smell that clung to everything during those months, the endless corridors with their fluorescent lighting, the sound of machines beeping in rhythm with my fear. Eleanor's hand in mine, cold and fragile as the doctor spoke words that felt like stones in my mouth. "Stage 3, he'd said, adjusting his glasses. "We caught it early enough for treatment, but it's aggressive." Eleanor squeezed my fingers so hard I thought she might break them. Verna sat beside us, 28 years old but looking like a lost child, her face white with shock. She hadn't spoken during the entire appointment, just stared at the x-rays on the light board as if willing them to change. The chemotherapy sessions blurred together, driving Eleanor to the hospital every Tuesday and Thursday, watching her hair fall out in clumps, pretending not to notice when she threw up in the parking lot afterward. She wore scarves and hats, kept her chin up, made jokes with the nurses, but at home, when she thought no one was looking, I'd catch her staring at herself in mirrors, with an expression I'd never seen before. Verna visited less and less as the months wore on. Work was busy, she said. Traffic was terrible. She had a life to live. But I saw the real reason in her eyes whenever she looked at her mother: terror. Pure, undiluted fear of watching the most important person in her world disappear piece by piece. "She's so young for this," Eleanor whispered to me one evening as we watched Verna flee after a 10-minute visit. I should have had more time with her. The final weeks were the worst. Hospice equipment crowded our bedroom, oxygen tanks, medication schedules, a hospital bed that seemed to swallow Eleanor whole. Verna came every day then, but she stayed in the kitchen mostly, washing dishes that were already clean, organizing cabinets that didn't need organizing. "Why couldn't you save her?" Verna's voice, barely audible over the sound of mourners filing past Eleanor's casket. Not accusatory, just broken. A question from a daughter who'd always believed her father could fix anything. I tried to hold her at the funeral, but she stepped away from my embrace, wrapping her arms around herself instead. She wore Eleanor's black dress, the one from their last mother-daughter dinner, and she looked so much like her mother, it made my chest ache. The days after the funeral stretched endlessly. I'd find Verna sitting in Eleanor's chair, holding her mother's reading glasses or favorite coffee mug, but she'd stiffen whenever I entered the room, as if my presence was a reminder of everything we'd both lost, everything I'd failed to protect. "She'll need you more than ever," Eleanor had told me during one of her last coherent moments. "Don't let her push you away, Ted. She's going to try, but don't let her." But I did let her. Every time Verna pulled back, every time she made excuses not to visit, every time she looked through me instead of at me, I let her go. I told myself she needed space to grieve, that pushing would only drive her further away. Now, holding this photograph of Eleanor's final Christmas with us, I could see the truth I'd been avoiding. Verna hadn't just lost her mother that day. She'd lost faith in me, too. Lost the belief that I could protect the people we loved, that I was strong enough to hold our family together without Eleanor as the center. The photograph trembled in my hands. Eleanor's eyes stared back at me, still bright with hope despite the illness ravaging her body. She'd trusted me to take care of our daughter, and I'd failed her. Failed them both. I set Eleanor's photograph back on the mantel and walked to the kitchen, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar ritual. Coffee, Eleanor's old ceramic mugs, the ones with tiny chips along the rims that we'd never bothered to replace. The routine felt hollow now, like performing a play for an empty theater. Steam rose from the fresh pot as I poured, the rich aroma filling the silence. But instead of comfort, the smell brought back another memory, the first time Micah had visited our home. Verna had been nervous that day, straightening couch cushions that didn't need straightening, checking the bathroom mirror 3 times. I'd made my famous lasagna, the recipe Eleanor had perfected over 20 years of Sunday dinners. "So this is where Verna grew up." Micah's voice had carried a tone I couldn't quite place at first. Cozy. The word hung in the air like smoke from a cigarette. Not small, cozy. Not modest, cozy. Everything about my life reduced to one patronizing syllable. He'd walked through our living room with the careful precision of someone touring a museum, his eyes cataloging every worn piece of furniture, every faded family photo, every visible sign of what Eleanor and I had built together over 3 decades. "We should probably eat out," he'd suggested when I invited him to stay for dinner. "There's this great place downtown. You'd love it, Mr. Grant." Verna had agreed immediately. "That sounds wonderful, Dad. Maybe we should try something new." Something new. As if 30 years of Sunday lasagna dinners were something to be ashamed of, something to outgrow. I watched them leave from my kitchen window, Micah's hand on Verna's back, guiding her toward his sleek BMW. Through the glass, I could hear him saying something about the neighborhood, about property values, about areas with more potential. The visits that followed grew shorter and less frequent. When they did come, Micah would make casual observations that felt like paper cuts, tiny, precise wounds that didn't bleed but never quite healed. "My father always says a man's worth is measured by what he provides," he'd mentioned one evening, glancing around our modest living room. "Success leaves clues, you know." Verna had started looking at our house differently after that. I'd catch her noticing things she'd never seen before. The water stain on the ceiling, the threadbare spots in the carpet, the way the kitchen faucet dripped, no matter how tightly I turned the handle. "Don't you want something better than this?" I'd overheard Micah ask her one afternoon as they stood in our driveway. "Better than this. Better than the home where she'd learned to walk, where Eleanor had read her bedtime stories, where we'd celebrated every birthday and holiday for 30 years. Maybe Dad should consider downsizing," Verna had said during one of their visits. "This place is getting too big for him to maintain alone." She'd been looking at Micah when she said it, seeking his approval. The daughter who used to defend me against playground bullies was now suggesting I abandon the home Eleanor and I had chosen together, the place where every room held memories of our life as a family. I should have fought back then, should have reminded Verna of Sunday mornings when she'd climb into our bed, between Eleanor and me, of the garden where her mother had taught her the names of flowers, of the kitchen where we'd made pancakes shaped like butterflies every birthday morning. Instead, I'd smiled politely and offered them coffee in Eleanor's chipped mugs. The coffee in my hands had grown cold while I stood lost in these memories. Outside the kitchen window, my neighbor was mowing his lawn, the sound a steady drone that seemed to come from another world. A normal Saturday afternoon in a normal suburban neighborhood, while my life fell apart one polite conversation at a time. Micah had won without ever declaring war. He'd simply shown Verna a different version of success, one where love was measured in dollar signs and worth was calculated by square footage. And I'd been too grief-stricken, too polite, too afraid of losing what little I had left of my daughter to fight for her respect. 6 days crawled by since that brutal text message, each one blending into the next like watercolors in rain. Sunday morning brought my first attempt to call Verna, but her phone went straight to voicemail, that cheerful professional recording that felt like another slap across the face. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Dad. I just wanted to..." The beep cut me off before I could finish. I stared at my phone, wondering if 30 seconds was enough to say everything I needed to say, or if 30 years wouldn't be sufficient. Monday and Tuesday followed the same pattern. One call each day, straight to voicemail, messages that grew increasingly desperate. "Verna, please call me back. I love you. Honey, we should talk about this." By Wednesday, I stopped calling altogether. Instead, I threw myself into cleaning, corners of the house I'd been avoiding since Eleanor died, closets full of her belongings that I couldn't bear to sort through. Her perfume still lingered on the dresses I'd never had the strength to donate. Her reading glasses sat on the nightstand beside our bed, waiting for her return. Thursday brought drafted text messages that I typed and deleted, a letter I wrote longhand but couldn't bring myself to mail. My handwriting looked shaky, old, nothing like the confident script that used to sign autographs for fans who remembered my band's brief moment of success. Friday morning found me in Eleanor's garden, pulling weeds from around her rose bushes. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding me through her careful instructions from summers past. "Not too close to the roots, Ted. Give them room to breathe." The dirt felt good under my fingernails, honest work that required nothing but attention and care. The afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders when my phone buzzed against my leg. Another telemarketer, probably, or maybe the pharmacy reminding me to pick up my blood pressure medication. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. Maybe hope, maybe habit, maybe the desperate part of me that still believed in miracles. "Dad, can we meet and talk? I'm sorry about everything." I read the message 3 times before the words registered, 4 times before I believed them. My fingers shook as I typed back, deleting and retyping until the response felt right. "Of course, sweetheart. When and where?" Her reply came quickly. "Corner Caf on Maple Street. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I'll be there." I set the phone down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter this fragile possibility. Then I walked inside and stood before the bathroom mirror, studying the face that looked back at me. Gray stubble, deeper lines around my eyes, the weight loss that made my shirts hang loose around my shoulders. Would she notice how much I'd aged in 6 days? Should I shave, dress up, try to look like the father she remembered instead of the broken man I'd become? The printed text message crinkled in my shirt pocket when I touched it. Proof that this wasn't another dream, another wishful fantasy born from too much solitude and regret. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I'd see my daughter again. Tomorrow, maybe, we could begin to find our way back to each other. 15 minutes early, as always. I sat at a corner table in the Sunset Bistro, checking my watch for the 4th time in 2 minutes. The caf hummed with Saturday morning energy. Young professionals on laptops, families with strollers, the kind of place where a single cup of coffee cost more than I used to spend on groceries for a week. My hands smoothed down my shirt collar, the same navy button-down I'd worn to Eleanor's funeral. Clean, pressed, but showing its age around the cuffs. When Verna walked through the glass doors at exactly 2 o'clock, I felt my chest tighten with relief. She looked beautiful. Expensive, too. Her designer purse alone probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check, but her eyes held the uncertainty of a child who'd broken something precious and wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible. "Dad," Her voice caught slightly. Thank you for coming. Sweetheart? I stood up too quickly, nearly knocking over my coffee. Of course I came. We hugged awkwardly across the small table, her perfume unfamiliar and sophisticated. When we sat down, silence stretched between us like a chasm neither of us knew how to cross. Your coffee's getting cold, she said, nodding at my untouched cup. I was nervous, I admitted. Didn't want to spill it when you arrived. That earned me a small smile, the first genuine one I'd seen from her in months. Dad, I'm so sorry about everything. The way I treated you, that horrible text message. Verna, honey, all that matters is that we're talking now. No, let me finish. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly around her latte. I was cruel, unforgivably cruel. And the things Micah said about your house, about your situation, he was right, though. I can't provide what you deserve. Stop. Her voice was firm, reminiscent of Eleanor when she'd made up her mind about something. You gave me everything that mattered. Love, stability, a childhood full of memories I treasure. Micah knows that now. He feels terrible about what he said. He wants to apologize to you personally. I nodded, though something twisted in my stomach. People like Micah didn't suddenly develop conscience pangs, but maybe I was being unfair. Maybe the stress of planning a wedding had made everyone say things they didn't mean. I still want to give you the $20,000, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket, where the check waited, carefully folded. It's all I have, but it's yours. Dad, no. Verna reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Buford has already covered everything. The venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. We don't need your money. We don't need your money. The words hit harder than she'd intended. Not we appreciate the offer, or you're so generous, but we don't need. As if my contribution was irrelevant rather than insufficient. I want you there, she continued, oblivious to the wound she'd just opened. I need my father at my wedding. Will you walk me down the aisle? My throat felt thick with emotion. Nothing would make me prouder. The ceremony is next Saturday, 3 o'clock at Ocean View Country Club in Malibu. It's going to be beautiful. Ocean views, about 200 guests. 200 guests. I tried to imagine standing among that crowd, shaking hands with Buford's wealthy friends, making small talk about investments and vacation homes, and all the things that filled their lives, but were foreign to mine. I'll be there, I promised. We talked for another hour, careful conversation that danced around the deeper issues. Verna told me about wedding details, the imported flowers, the live quartet, the dinner menu that read like poetry. I listened and nodded and tried to share her excitement, even as each lavish detail reminded me how far outside this world I truly belonged. When we finally stood to leave, she hugged me properly this time, holding on long enough for me to smell her expensive shampoo and feel how thin she'd gotten. I love you, Dad, she whispered against my shoulder. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know. Outside the cafe, her BMW gleamed in the afternoon sunshine. I walked her to the driver's side, noting the leather seats, the pristine interior, the dashboard that looked like a spaceship compared to my old Honda. See you next Saturday, she said, sliding behind the wheel. I watched her drive away, her car disappearing into traffic like a sleek fish returning to its natural element. Then I stood alone on the sidewalk, surrounded by the sounds of wealth and success, feeling simultaneously grateful and utterly inadequate. The reconciliation I'd dreamed about for a week had happened. My daughter loved me again, wanted me at her wedding, had apologized for her cruelty. So why did I feel like I'd lost something instead of gained it back? The drive home from downtown took 45 minutes through Saturday afternoon traffic, giving me too much time to replay every word of our conversation. Verna's apology had been genuine, her love real, but underneath it all, I sensed the subtle architecture of her new life. A life where my $20,000 was unnecessary, where Buford's generosity made my sacrifices insignificant. My house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, shabby even, paint peeling around the window frames, lawn that needed cutting, the kind of modest middle-class dwelling that people like Micah probably drove past without seeing. Inside, I spread the wedding invitation across my kitchen table, studying the elegant script, the heavy cardstock that probably cost more per sheet than I spent on a week's groceries. Ocean View Country Club. I'd looked it up online. Exclusive membership, oceanfront location, the kind of place where parking valets earned more in tips than I collected in Social Security. Despite Verna's refusal, I pulled out my checkbook and began writing carefully. $20,000. My entire financial worth reduced to numbers on a piece of paper. I'd attach a note, something simple about love being more valuable than money, about wanting to contribute to her happiness. 3 drafts of the note went into my wastebasket before I got the wording right. Too sentimental in the first version, too formal in the second. The third struck the right balance for my beautiful daughter on her wedding day. Love, Dad. My best suit hung in the bedroom closet, protected by a plastic dry cleaning bag that crinkled when I touched it. Navy blue with thin pinstripes, purchased for Eleanor's funeral and worn perhaps 3 times since. The fabric was quality wool, but the style screamed early 2000s. Wide lapels, slightly boxy cut, the kind of suit that would immediately identify me as someone who couldn't afford to keep up with fashion trends. I held it up to the bedroom mirror, trying to see myself as Verna's wealthy new family would see me. The suit was clean, pressed, dignified in its way, but next to Micah's designer attire, next to whatever Buford would be wearing, I'd look like exactly what I was, a man doing his best with limited resources. The gift envelope required careful consideration. Too casual, and it would look like I didn't take the occasion seriously. Too elaborate, and it might seem like I was trying too hard to impress. I settled on cream-colored stationery from the box Eleanor had given me years ago, tucking the check and note inside with the precise care of someone who understood that presentation mattered when you had little else to offer. Evening crept across my house like fog rolling in from the ocean. I made a simple dinner, soup and crackers, and sat at my kitchen table looking out at Eleanor's garden. She would have known what to wear to a wedding at Ocean View Country Club, would have helped me navigate the social complexities of wealth and status. Without her, I felt like an actor who'd forgotten his lines. The alarm clock beside my bed showed 9:47 when I finally turned out the lights. 1 week until the wedding. 1 week to mentally prepare for a world where my daughter belonged, but I remained forever an outsider. I lay awake for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of my old house settling around me. Somewhere in Malibu, 200 people would gather next Saturday to celebrate Verna's new beginning. I'd be among them, wearing my outdated suit and carrying my modest gift, proud of my daughter but acutely aware of everything I couldn't provide. The wedding invitation sat on my nightstand, cream and gold elegant against the worn wood. Tomorrow I'd iron my shirt, polish my only pair of dress shoes, practice small talk for conversations I'd never truly belonged to. But tonight, I simply held the envelope containing my $20,000 gift and wondered if love could ever be enough when the world measured worth in currency I'd never possess. My Honda looked like a rust-colored beetle among the gleaming luxury vehicles in the Ocean View Country Club parking lot. Mercedes, BMW, Porsche, cars that cost more than I'd earned in my best years with the band. The young valet who took my keys managed to keep his expression neutral, but I caught the slight raise of his eyebrows as he glanced at my car's dented bumper. "Welcome to Ocean View, sir," he said politely, handing me a numbered ticket. The clubhouse entrance was all marble and crystal, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing an impossible view of the Pacific Ocean. Guests flowed through the space in designer formal wear, their conversations a symphony of confidence and casual wealth. I clutched the envelope containing my gift, suddenly aware of how my navy suit stood out, not in a good way, among the impeccably dressed crowd. "Excuse me, are you at the Grant party or the Thompson party?" A young woman with a clipboard and headset approached me with professional efficiency. "Grant, I'm Theodore Grant, Verna's father." Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of recognition followed by something that might have been pity. "Of course. Right this way, Mr. Grant. You're at table 12. Table 12 sat near the back of the reception area, close to the kitchen doors. Not exactly the place of honor for the father of the bride, but then again Buford was paying for this elaborate production. I was more guest than family here. "And what line of work are you in?" The man seated next to me extended a manicured hand. His watch alone probably cost more than my annual income. "I'm retired," I said, which was technically true. "Oh, wonderful. What did you retire from?" The conversation died when I mentioned my modest pension and Social Security. He turned to discuss real estate investments with the woman on his other side, leaving me to observe the magnificent chaos around me. Waiters in black uniforms glided between tables carrying champagne flutes and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. A string quartet played softly near the ocean view windows. Floral arrangements that probably cost thousands of dollars created fragrant sculptures throughout the space. I calculated costs automatically, a habit developed during Eleanor's illness, when every dollar had mattered. The flowers alone represented months of my income. The champagne being poured so freely cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a week. "Daddy!" Verna appeared beside my table, radiant in her flowing white gown. For a moment, she was just my little girl again, the child who used to dance on my feet in our living room while Eleanor played piano. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I managed, standing to hug her carefully, mindful of her elaborate dress and professional makeup. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered, but her eyes were already scanning the crowd, tracking the dozens of details that required her attention as the bride. "Where should I put this?" I held up my gift envelope, suddenly conscious of its simplicity among the towering display of elaborately wrapped presents near the entrance. "Just put it with the others," she said distractedly, already moving toward the next group of guests requiring acknowledgement. I walked to the gift table, my cream envelope looking like a child's drawing, next to the professional wrapping and elegant ribbons surrounding it. $20,000, my entire financial worth, reduced to the most modest offering in a sea of extravagant generosity. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for the ceremony." The crowd began moving toward the outdoor pavilion where chairs were arranged in perfect rows facing the ocean. I found my assigned seat in the third row from the back, far from the family section where Micah's relatives sat in expensive fabrics and confident postures. Ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine as guests settled into their places. Somewhere in this perfectly choreographed production, my daughter would marry into a world where my love mattered, but my presence was merely tolerated. The string quartet transitioned into wedding music, and I gripped the program in my hands, watching as Buford Thompson's world prepared to welcome my daughter permanently into its embrace. Crystal clinked against crystal as the reception began in earnest. I found myself seated at table 12 with distant relatives I barely recognized, second cousins and family friends who offered polite smiles, before turning to more interesting conversations about vacation homes in Tuscany and investment portfolios. The dinner was spectacular, each course more elaborate than anything I'd eaten in years. Lobster bisque, filet mignon with truffle sauce, wines that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on food in a month. I ate carefully, conscious of every movement, every sound my fork made against the expensive china. Laughter rippled across the room as stories were shared and toasts prepared. From the head table, I could see Verna glowing with happiness, Micah beside her, looking every inch the successful groom. Buford commanded attention at the center, regaling guests with animated stories that drew appreciative chuckles. When Micah stood up, tapping his crystal glass with a silver knife, the room fell silent with expectation. He looked confident, comfortable, born to this moment of being the center of attention in a room full of important people. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate this special day," he began, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Verna and I are so grateful to have family and friends who've supported our journey together." Approving murmurs drifted across the tables. I shifted uncomfortably, sensing something in Micah's tone that made my stomach tighten. "Family is everything," Micah continued, his eyes sweeping the room. "And speaking of family, I want to acknowledge someone very special here tonight. Verna's father, Theodore Grant." Every head in the room turned toward me. I felt heat creep up my neck as 200 pairs of eyes focused on my table, on my outdated suit, on the envelope containing my inadequate gift. Theodore represents something we don't see much anymore, a man who's learned to live within his means. Micah's smile was bright, seemingly innocent, but his words cut like surgical instruments. While the rest of us chase success and material things, Theodore has found contentment in simplicity. His modest little house, his careful budgeting, his, what would you call it, rustic approach to life. Laughter began to ripple across the room, polite at first, then growing bolder as guests realized this was meant to be amusing. In fact, Micah continued, warming to his theme, when Theodore generously offered to contribute to our wedding, he brought out his checkbook with the pride of a man offering his very last $20. Which, let's be honest, it probably was. The laughter grew louder now. I sat frozen, my face burning with humiliation, as Micah painted me as a figure of gentle mockery, the poor relative everyone tolerates, but nobody takes seriously. So let's raise our glasses to Theodore Grant, Micah concluded, lifting his champagne flute high. A reminder that happiness doesn't require a bank account, that love transcends material success, and that sometimes the greatest gift is simply knowing your place in the world. The applause was thunderous. Guests raised their glasses toward me, their faces bright with patronizing amusement. I was the wedding entertainment, the quaint poor relative whose struggles made everyone else feel generous and enlightened. But then something shifted. From across the room, Buford Thompson's face had gone pale. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't identify, recognition mixed with disbelief. His mouth opened slightly, champagne glass forgotten in his hand. "Wait," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the dying laughter. "Wait just a minute." The room fell silent again, but this time with confusion instead of amusement. Buford stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving my face. "Aren't you Theodore Grant from Electric Storm?" Silence crashed over the banquet hall like a wave. Every fork stopped midway to mouths. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Buford Thompson stood frozen at the head table, pointing at me with a trembling finger, his face transformed by recognition. "Electric Storm," he repeated louder this time. "The band. Midnight Highway. Broken Dreams. Thunder Roll. That was you, wasn't it?" Other guests began turning in their seats, studying my face with new intensity. I heard whispered conversations starting. Electric Storm? That rock band from the 90s? They had like 3 number-1 hits. Micah still held his microphone, but his confident smile had frozen into something resembling panic. He looked between his father and me as if we were speaking a foreign language. "Yes," I said quietly, my voice somehow carrying across the silent room. "I was the lead singer of Electric Storm." The admission hit the crowd like an earthquake. Chairs scraped against marble as people leaned forward, suddenly seeing me not as the poor relation, but as someone whose music had soundtracked their younger years. "I knew it!" Buford practically shouted, abandoning his table to stride across the room toward me. "I saw you guys at the Forum in '96. Front row! You signed my girlfriend's shirt." Other voices joined in now, the excitement building like a thunderstorm. "I had all your albums. Didn't you guys sell out Madison Square Garden? Whatever happened to Electric Storm?" I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The room spun slightly as decades of buried memories crashed back. The screaming crowds, the sold-out venues, the record deals and magazine covers, and money that flowed like water. "What happened to the band?" Buford asked breathlessly, now standing directly in front of me. "I left," I said simply. "When Verna was born, I walked away from everything. Music, touring, recording, all of it." "But why?" someone called out from across the room. "You guys were huge." I looked at Verna, sitting at the head table with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the magnitude of what I'd sacrificed. Because being a father mattered more than being famous. Because I wanted to be there for every school play, every scraped knee, every bedtime story. Because some things are more important than success. "And your wife's illness," Buford said softly, his fan enthusiasm giving way to human understanding. "I read about that in Rolling Stone years later. You spent everything on her treatment, didn't you?" The room held its breath. "Every penny," I confirmed. "The house, the cars, the investments. Everything went to keeping Eleanor alive as long as possible. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow." Applause began slowly, starting with Buford and spreading across the room like wildfire. But this wasn't the patronizing clapping from Micah's toast. This was genuine admiration, respect for a man who'd chosen love over legacy, family over fame. Micah still stood with the microphone in his hand, his face white with shock. The man he'd spent months mocking, the father-in-law he'd dismissed as a failure, was a rock star who'd voluntarily given up everything for the family Micah was now joining. Ladies and gentlemen, Buford announced, his voice thick with emotion, we're in the presence of true greatness. Not the kind that comes from money or status, but the kind that comes from sacrifice and love. The applause grew louder, guests rising from their seats. Someone shouted, "Electric storm!" Others began chanting it. I stood there in my outdated suit, overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of fortune, finally receiving the recognition I'd never sought, but somehow desperately needed. From across the room, Verna's eyes met mine through her tears, and in them I saw understanding, remorse, and something that looked like awe. My daughter was finally seeing me not as the inadequate man she'd grown ashamed of, but as the father who'd loved her enough to sacrifice everything. Through the standing ovation, I watched Verna rise from the head table, her wedding gown flowing behind her like sea foam as she moved toward me. Tears streaked her makeup, but she looked more beautiful than she had all day. Raw, real, finally seeing me clearly after years of looking through me. "Dad," she whispered when she reached me, her voice breaking on the single syllable. I opened my arms and she fell into them, sobbing against my shoulder, the way she had as a child after nightmares. Her expensive perfume mixed with the salt of tears, her designer dress creasing against my old suit, but none of that mattered now. "Forgive me," she choked out between sobs. "I never knew what you sacrificed for me. I never understood." "Sweetheart, there's nothing to forgive," I murmured, stroking her hair the way Eleanor used to. "I got the greatest gift, watching you grow up. Every song I didn't write, every stage I didn't perform on, it was all worth it for you." Around us the applause continued, but it felt distant now, background noise to this moment I'd been waiting 3 years to experience. My daughter in my arms again, really seeing me, really understanding what our family had meant. Micah appeared beside us, the microphone still clutched in his hand, his face pale with shame. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice barely audible above the continuing ovation, "Sir, I had no idea. I'm deeply ashamed of everything I've said, everything I've assumed." I looked at him over Verna's head, this young man who'd spent months diminishing me, and saw genuine horror in his eyes. Not embarrassment at being caught, but true recognition of the pain he'd caused. "You didn't know," I said simply. "That's no excuse." He lifted the microphone with shaking hands. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention once more?" The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in emotional tenor. "I owe someone a profound apology," Micah continued, his voice stronger now. "Theodore Grant is not just a rock legend who chose family over fame. He's the kind of man I hope to become, someone who understands that love and sacrifice matter more than money or status. Sir, I'm honored to call you family." He stepped forward and extended his hand. I shook it firmly, seeing something different in his eyes now, not the calculating assessment of my worth, but genuine respect for choices he was only beginning to understand. "To Theodore Grant," Buford shouted from across the room, raising his champagne glass high. "A true hero." "To Theodore," the crowd responded, and suddenly I was surrounded by people who wanted to shake my hand, to tell me about concerts they'd attended, albums they'd owned, how my music had been the soundtrack to their youth. But the most important voice was Verna's, whispering against my shoulder as we held each other in the center of the storm. "I'm so proud to be your daughter," she said. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to remember what that really means." The party swirled around us, laughter and music and the clink of expensive glasses, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because of the applause or the recognition, but because my daughter's arms were around me, and she finally understood the depth of love that had shaped every choice I'd ever made. When we finally separated, Buford insisted I join the family at the head table, moving chairs to make room beside Verna. As I settled into my new place of honor, I looked across the room at the gift table where my modest envelope sat among the elaborate packages. $20,000. Still everything I had. Still not much compared to the wealth surrounding me. But for the first time, it felt like enough. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.